The sun did not just shine, it pressed. It was a physical weight on Luke Barringer's shoulders, a hot hand against the back of his neck. He had been riding south for 3 days since Tucson, pushing his buckskin mare, Bess. Harder than any animal should be pushed. But Tucson was poison now. Tucson was the smell of sulfur and cheap whiskey, the sight of a man's surprised face as he slumped over a card table, the sound of Luke's own voice, ragged and hoarse, shouting something he could not remember. He was riding away from a cattle war he had never meant to join. He had just been drifting, looking for wages, when he signed on with the wrong outfit. The brand on the cattle did not seem to matter until the shooting started. And when it started, Luke found he was faster with his Colt than he had ever wanted to be. He had killed 2 men. One was a hired gun like himself. The other was the ranch owner's youngest son, a boy of 19 with whiskey courage and a shaky hand. Luke had not meant to kill him, but the boy had drawn first. That detail did not matter to the lawman riding with the owner's posse. So Luke ran. Now, in the high, brutal oven of the Sonoran desert, his running was coming to an end. Bess stumbled, her breath catching in a dry, rattling sob. "Easy, girl, easy now," Luke whispered, his own voice cracking. He swung down from the saddle, his boots sinking into the hot gravel. The mare stood with her head hung low, her hide slick with sweat that dried almost instantly, leaving white salt patterns. Her legs trembled. "Just a little further. Bess, just to those rocks." He pulled the canteen from his saddle horn. It felt terrifyingly light. He unscrewed the cap and poured a mouthful into his palm, offering it to her. She lipped at the water, her eyes dull and half-closed. He gave her another mouthful, then took a scant sip for himself. The water was hot, metallic, and did nothing to cut the dust caked in his throat. He tugged the reins. "Come on, girl." Bess took one step, then another. Her hind legs buckled. She went down on her haunches, then rolled onto her side with a groan that seemed ripped from the very earth. "No, no, Bess, get up, get up!" Luke pulled at the reins, his voice rising in panic. The mare only shuddered. Her ribs expanded in one last, desperate heave, and then a long, final sigh escaped her. She was still. Luke stood frozen, the reins still gripped in his hand. The silence of the desert crashed down on him. There was no wind, no birds, only the buzzing of some unseen insect and the hammering of his own blood in his ears. He was alone. He was afoot, and the nearest water, as far as he knew, was 50 miles away. He stared at the body of his horse, his last companion, his only way out. He felt a swell of grief so sharp it choked him, but it was a luxury he could not afford. The sun was already starting to bake the hide. Slowly, methodically, he unbuckled the saddlebags. He took the remaining jerky, the small bag of bullets, his spare shirt, and his knife. He checked his revolver, ensuring the cylinders were full. He pulled his rifle from the scabbard. He took the canteen. He looked at the horse one last time, touched her neck, and then turned his back. He began to walk. The first day was a blur of heat and grit. Luke Barringer walked with the sun drilling into him, following the faint line of a ridge he hoped might lead to lower ground, perhaps a stream. The landscape was alien, hostile. Giant saguaros stood like silent, wounded sentinels, their arms raised to a sky that offered no mercy. Cholla cactus, brittle and barbed, seemed to snatch at his trousers. By evening, his lips were cracked and bleeding. He ate a piece of jerky, but it was like chewing leather. It took all the moisture in his mouth to soften it, and he had none to spare. He sipped the last hot drops from his canteen and kept walking until the sky turned a deep, bruised purple and the stars emerged, cold and distant. He lay down on the hard ground, using the saddlebags as a pillow, his rifle beside him. Sleep did not come as rest. It came as a fever. He was back in Tucson. At the gilded cage, he saw the foreman, Miller, Throw his cards down. You are cheating, Berenger. I am not, Luke had said, his voice level, though his hand was already moving toward his holster. You are working for the Hazlitt crew, are not you? You are a spy and a cheat. Then the boy, Billy, had stood up, his chair scraping. He killed my pa's cattle. I seen him. The lie was so bold, so sudden, that Luke had hesitated. That hesitation was almost his last. The boy drew, wild and afraid. Luke drew faster. The flash, the smoke, the sound of the woman screaming at the piano. He saw the boy's face, the sudden understanding, the red stain blooming on his white shirt. Luke woke with a gasp, his own hand gripping the butt of his revolver. The desert was silver under the moonlight. His heart was pounding. He had killed him. He had run. The guilt felt heavier than the heat. The second day was worse. The canteen was empty. His throat was no longer dry. It was sealed. He walked, and the world began to shimmer. The saguaros seemed to bend and whisper. He thought he saw men on horseback, the glint of the lawman's badge, and he dove behind a nest of prickly pear, cutting his hands on the spines. But there was nothing there, only the heat and the silence. He was starving, but the hunger was a dull ache compared to the screaming fire of his thirst. His blisters had broken, and every step was a fresh jolt of pain. He was not walking, he was stumbling, a collection of aches and sun-scorched skin held together by a fading memory of who he was. He was a cowboy. He rode horses, he worked cattle. He was not a killer. But the boy was dead. By the third morning, he was on his hands and knees. He had lost his rifle somewhere in the night, his mind too fogged to care. He knew he was dying. He knew it with a dull certainty that left no room for fear. He just wanted it to be over. He crawled into the shallow shade of a palo verde tree and closed his eyes. He dreamed of water, of a creek in Montana, cold and clear, where he had fished as a boy. The sound of it, the rush and tumble, was so real that he opened his eyes. There was no creek, but he was in a dip in the land, a dry wash, an arroyo. Rain had carved this path, and rain would carve it again. Instinct, buried deep beneath the delirium, took over. Water, or signs of it, would be low. He rolled onto his stomach and began to crawl, following the sandy bed of the dead river. He crawled for hours. The sun moved past its zenith. His hands were raw, his knees bleeding into his trousers. He was about to give up, to let the desert claim him, when he smelled it. Smoke. He lifted his head, sniffing the air. It was faint, the smell of mesquite burning. It was life. Hope, thin and sharp, cut through the fever. He forced himself to his feet, swaying. He leaned against the rocky side of the wash. He could see where the arroyo curved around a tall bluff of red rock. The smoke was coming from beyond it. A miner, he thought, a prospector, or maybe just another drifter. Like him, someone with water. He fumbled for his revolver, pulling it from the holster. He did not know if he was walking toward salvation or another fight, but he had to know. He moved slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel, each step an agony. He rounded the bluff, clinging to the rock wall. The arroyo opened into a small, hidden canyon. It was no more than a few acres, walled in by high, sheer cliffs of red rock that glowed in the late afternoon sun. It was desolate, but it was not empty. In the center, sheltered by the cliff overhang, was a small, neat structure of adobe, its roof thatched with branches. A thin ribbon of gray smoke trailed from a hole in the roof. A small, defiant patch of green, corn, was growing near the house, irrigated by what looked like a shallow, hand-dug well. He was not expecting a house. He was expecting a tent, a lean-to, and he was not expecting them. 3 women emerged from the shadow of the doorway. They moved not with a start, but with the fluid silence of deer. They were Apache. They stood in a line, watching him. Their dresses were a mix of calico and worked buckskin, worn and patched but clean. Their black hair was tied back. Their faces were carved by sun and hardship, and something deeper, loss. Luke stopped, his hand still on his gun. He tried to raise his other hand in peace, but his arm was too heavy. The eldest woman stepped forward. Her face was a map of lines, her eyes as dark and hard as obsidian. She held an old, long-barreled rifle, and she aimed it directly at his chest. The youngest, perhaps barely 20, stood beside her, her expression a knot of pure bitterness. She held nothing, but her hands were clenched into fists. The third woman, who stood slightly behind the others, was watching him with a different expression. It was not anger. It was a deep, haunted sadness, a gaze that seemed to look right through him. "Go," the eldest woman said. Her voice was low, guttural. The one word of English was all she needed. Luke tried to speak. He tried to say water. He tried to say please, but his tongue was a piece of dry wood in his mouth. He could not form the words. He saw the rifle barrel, steady and sure. He knew she would shoot. He had run from one death only to walk right into another. He looked from the rifle to her eyes. He wanted to tell her he was not a soldier. He was not a threat. He was just a man, finished. The world tilted. The red cliffs spun. The blackness that had been creeping at the edge of his vision for 2 days finally rushed in and claimed him. He did not even feel himself hit the ground. He woke to the taste of water. It was cool, tinged with something earthy, like mint. Someone was holding his head, lifting it gently, pressing a wet cloth to his cracked lips, letting the moisture drip into his mouth. He was in darkness, or near it. The air was cool and smelled of adobe, smoke, and herbs. He was lying on a pallet of blankets on a hard-packed earth floor. A small fire crackled in a hearth in the corner, casting a low, orange glow. He opened his eyes. The gentle woman, the one with the haunted gaze, was kneeling beside him. She saw his eyes were open and froze, like a doe about to bolt. She was younger than he first thought, perhaps his own age. Her face was fine-boned, beautiful in its stillness. "Alonza," a sharp voice said from the shadows. The woman, Alonza, pulled the cloth away and retreated. The eldest woman moved into the light. She was the one who had held the rifle. She stood over him, her arms crossed. "Naiche," she said, tapping her own chest. She pointed to the woman who had nursed him. "Alonza." Then she gestured toward the far side of the small room, where the youngest one sat sharpening a knife, her back to them. "Taya." She had given him their names. She had not asked for his. Naiche looked down at him, her face unreadable. He was her prisoner, or her patient. He could not tell which. He saw his gun belt and knife hanging from a peg on the wall, far out of his reach. "You are trouble," Naiche said, the words clear. "Soldiers look for you." Luke tried to shake his head. It felt too heavy. "No," he rasped. "Not soldiers, ranchers." Taya, the young one, spat into the fire. "All white men are the same." "Taya, hush," Naiche commanded, not looking away from Luke. "Why they look for you." Luke closed his eyes. The fever was coming back, pulling him under. The nightmare images flickered. The boy's face, the blood. "I killed a man in Tucson." He expected her to call for the others, to drag him back outside and leave him for the coyotes. A murderer. Instead, Naiche was silent for a long moment. He felt her gaze on him, studying him. "Only one?" she asked, her tone flat. He opened his eyes. She was not shocked. She was not angry. "Two," he whispered, ashamed. Naiche nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something. "Rest. You drink water. Tomorrow. We see." She turned and went back to the fire, sitting on a low stool. She had saved him. But as Luke looked at her rigid back, he knew it was not mercy. It was something else. It was duty, or maybe just a delay of judgment. He drifted. For how long? He did not know. Time was measured in sips of water from Alanza's hand. In the sharp, angry movements of Taya, she threw more wood on the fire. And in the heavy, judging silence of Naichi, he learned through the fever fog, he learned that they were widows. He did not know how, but the grief was a fourth presence in the tiny adobe home. It clung to the walls, thick as the smoke. He learned that their canyon was their fortress. It was desolate. Yes, the dry riverbed and the mesquite trees spoke of survival. Not comfort, but the high red cliffs were a barrier. They glowed like blood in the sunset. And he realized they were not just hiding from the world, they were exiled. The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut. They spoke to each other in their own tongue, low and fast. He was a stone dropped into a still, deep pond. He was a complication. He was a white man. When Taya brought him a bowl of thin corn gruel, she did not look at him. She shoved the bowl into his hands, her face tight with a resentment so strong it was almost a physical force. Alanza, however, would sometimes meet his gaze. Her eyes were full of ghosts. He recognized it. He saw his own haunting in her. When she bathed his face, her touch was gentle but distant, as if she were tending a memory, not a man. Naichi was the leader. She was the iron spine. She rationed the food. She gave the orders. She kept the rifle near her. She watched him with a practicality that was more unnerving than Taya's hate. She was weighing him. She was deciding if he was worth the water he drank or the trouble he represented. On what he thought was the second or third night, a storm rolled in. The wind howled over the canyon rim. A high, mournful sound. Thunder cracked, echoing off the cliffs like artillery. Rain began to fall, hard and driving. The women were calm. They moved to secure the door, placing a pot under a small leak in the roof. The storm was familiar to them. To Luke, it was the sound of the world ending. The fever spiked, and the thunder became the sound of gunshots. He was back in Tucson. He was running, but his boots were full of lead. The man he shot, the boy, was standing in front of him, the red hole in his shirt. The boy was pointing at him, his mouth open, but no sound came out. Luke tried to apologize, tried to say he did not mean it. "He is one of them!" a voice screamed. It was Miller, the foreman. "He is one of them!" The blood was on his hands. He tried to wipe it on his shirt, but it only smeared. It was thick, sticky. He looked up, and the boy was gone. In his place was Naichi and Alanza and Taya. Their faces were streaked with tears and war paint. They were pointing at him. "Pinda lik oyi," they whispered. White eyes. The enemy. "No," Luke moaned, thrashing on the pallet. I did not." He cried out, a raw, broken sound, and his eyes snapped open. The adobe hut was dark. The storm had passed, leaving only the sound of dripping water. The fire was down to glowing embers. Someone was sitting by the fire. It was Naichi. She was not sleeping. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, watching him. The embers cast just enough light to show the glint of steel in her hand. It was not the rifle. It was a knife. She held it loosely, its point resting on her knee, but it was ready. She had been guarding him, or guarding her family from him. He was soaked in sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The nightmare clung to him. Their eyes met across the small, dark room. He expected to see contempt or fear. He saw neither. Her face, in the dying light, was just tired. It was the weariness of someone who had sat vigil over death too many times. She had seen his ghosts, and they did not scare her. They were familiar. Luke held her gaze. He was a killer. She was a widow. He was a white man. She was Apache. He was an exile. And so was she. Naichi did not move. She did not lower the knife, but she gave a single, slow nod. It was not a welcome. It was not forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement, a shared, silent understanding that the world was a place of blood and running. And that they were, for this one night. Two survivors trapped in the same small patch of darkness. When the sun rose, it cut a sharp, clean line across the canyon floor, illuminating the small, washed world. The rain had passed, leaving the air tasting of wet dust and creosote. Luke Barringer woke to the smell of damp earth. His fever was broken. The fire in his veins had been reduced to a dull ache in his bones, but his head was clear. He was weak, weaker than a newborn colt. He pushed himself up on one elbow, his muscles screaming in protest. The adobe hut was empty. Through the open doorway, he could see Naichi standing near the well, her back to him, looking at the small patch of corn. The storm had been hard, and some of the stalks were flattened. Luke looked up. The roof above his head was dripping in 3 different places. The storm had torn at the thatch, washing away clumps of dried mud and branches. Shame settled on him, heavy and cold. He was a burden. He had eaten their food, slept under their roof, and now that roof was leaking. He was a man who had always paid his way, or tried to. He had taken their water, their gruel, and in return, he had given them nightmares. He gripped the edge of the low doorway and hauled himself to his feet. The world swam for a moment, a blur of brown adobe and bright blue sky. He steadied himself, his hand flat against the cool wall. His own clothes, stiff with sweat and dirt, felt alien on his skin. His boots, which Alonza must have removed while he was in the fever, sat by the door. He shoved his feet into them, not bothering to straighten the leather. Naichi heard him. She turned, her face impassive. She watched him stumble out of the darkness of the hut into the blinding morning. She did not raise her rifle, which leaned against the adobe wall near her, but her hand rested near it. Luke took 2 steps toward the canyon opening, his eyes fixed on the sliver of open desert visible beyond the red rock walls. He had to leave. He was trouble. He was a white man in an Apache home, a killer hiding with widows. He was a spark, and they were tinder. "I am going," he rasped. His voice was a stranger's, thin and dry. Naichi said nothing. She just watched him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She would not stop him. She would not help him. He took another step. His left knee buckled. The strength he thought he had was a mirage, just an absence of fever. The starvation, the days of walking, the dehydration, it all came rushing back, a debt his body had to pay. He fell to his knees in the damp sand. He clenched his fists, humiliated. He could not even walk. He was trapped. He stayed there for a long moment, breathing hard, the sun already hot on his bent back. He heard Taya and Alonza come out of the hut behind him, drawn by the silence. He could feel Taya's scornful gaze on him, a physical thing. Slowly, using the last of his pride, he pushed himself up again. He did not try for the canyon mouth this time. He turned, facing the 3 women. He looked past Naichi, past Taya's anger and Alonza's pity. He looked at the leaking roof. "I can work," he said, his voice stronger. He pointed at the damaged thatch. "The roof, I can fix it." He pointed to the small, dwindling pile of mesquite roots by the fire pit. "I can chop wood. I can hunt, if you give me back my rifle." Taya let out a short, sharp laugh, like a bark. "Hunt? You cannot stand." "Taya," Naiche said, her voice low. She looked at Luke, her gaze traveling from his face, to the roof, to the wood pile. She was weighing him again, just as she had the night he arrived. He was a danger, but he was also a pair of strong hands. He was a man's labor, something this canyon had not seen in a long time. "You are weak," she stated. "I will get strong," Luke countered. "I just need food. I will earn it." Naichi held his gaze. He saw the calculation in her eyes. The corn was damaged. The wood was low. Winter was not a season here, but the cold nights would come, and they would be long. "You chop wood," she said, pointing to the pile. "You fix the roof. You eat, then you go." It was a bargain. It was a reprieve. Luke nodded, relief making him dizzy. "Yes, all right." He started that same morning. His first efforts were pitiful. He picked up the worn, heavy axe that leaned against the wall. The handle was smooth, polished by smaller hands than his. He swung at a thick piece of mesquite root. The axe blade bounced, sending a shock up his arms that nearly dropped him. Taya, who was grinding corn on a flat stone near the doorway, watched him. "The white man is weaker than a woman," she said in her own language, loud enough for the tone to carry. Alonza flinched, but Naichi ignored her. Luke grit his teeth. He spat on his palms, gripped the axe, and swung again. This time he put his weight into it. The wood cracked. He swung again and again, sweat stinging his eyes, his muscles burning. He worked until a small pile of split wood lay at his feet. Only then did he allow himself to sit. Alonza brought him water in a clay cup. She did not meet his eyes. She set it on the ground near him and hurried back to the loom that was set up under the shade of the cliff overhang. He drank, the water tasting sweeter than any whiskey. He watched them. Their life was a rhythm of hard, constant work, from sunup until sundown. They did not stop. They tended the small, struggling corn patch, coaxing life from the dry soil. They ground the corn, patted the meal into thin cakes, and cooked them on a hot stone, and they wove. The loom was their true work. It was a tall, upright frame, and stretched upon it was a rug of intricate design, patterns of red and black and brown. Alonza and Naichi would sit before it for hours, their fingers flying, weaving the threads with a speed and precision that fascinated him. Taya, it seemed, was the forager. She would leave for hours with a basket and return with roots, prickly pear fruit, and sometimes snares holding a few lean rabbits. They were a self-contained unit, 3 women against the desert, surviving. One afternoon, Naichi and Taya began to prepare for a journey. They carefully bundled 2 of the finished rugs, beautiful, heavy things, and tied them with yucca fiber. "We go," Naichi told Luke. He was on the roof, slowly reweaving branches into the thatch, his strength returning with each bowl of gruel. "To trade." "Where?" he asked. Her look was sharp. "A settlement for whites." She pointed at him. "You stay here. Do not go near the well. Do not be seen. If soldiers come—" She did not finish. She did not have to. "I will stay," he said. They were gone the rest of the day. Luke worked, patching the roof, keenly aware of Alonza's presence below. She was at the loom, but her work was slower, more hesitant, without Naichi. The silence in the canyon was heavy, different. Late in the day, the other 2 returned. Luke heard them before he saw them. Taya's voice, sharp and angry, echoing off the rocks. When they came into view, he saw Taya's face was dark with fury. They carried a sack of flour, a small bag of salt, and some beans, and Taya had a fresh, dark bruise spreading on her upper arm, just below her sleeve. Naichi unslung the bags, her face a mask of stone. Taya threw her share down and stalked to the far side of the canyon, where she sat staring at the rock wall. Later, when Naichi and Taya were inside, Luke climbed down from the roof. His muscles ached, but it was a good ache, the ache of work, not sickness. He found Alonza by the fire pit, quietly mending a tear in Taya's dress. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low. "In town." Alonza did not look up, her fingers working the needle. "It is always the same. The settlement, near the old Presidio. Mr. Sutton. He runs the trading post. He trades, but he hates us." "He did that?" Luke asked, nodding toward the shadow where Taya sat. Alonza paused. She called him a thief. He said the rugs were not worth more. She tried to take them back. His son, he grabbed her. He said—" Her voice faltered. He said Apache women are dirty, that we are ghosts, cursed. He said we should have died with our men. Luke felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Why do you go there? Where else? Alonza whispered, finally looking up. Her haunted eyes were full of a terrible, quiet acceptance. We are not welcome with our people. They say this canyon is cursed, that we did not mourn right. The white men, they hate us. We are between. This is all we have. The admission hung in the cooling air. He was in exile. They were exiles. His was from a gunfight. Theirs was from the world. His strength returned fully over the next week. The roof was solid. The woodpile was as tall as he was. He started reinforcing the small, sagging corral where they kept 2 goats. He was working, earning his keep, and he and Alonza talked. She would bring him water while he worked, and she would stay for a moment. Her fear of him had faded, replaced by a quiet curiosity. You have seen trouble, she said one afternoon. She was watching him twist a new rail into place. She pointed to a long, white scar on his forearm, a crescent shape that disappeared under his sleeve. He stopped, his hand resting on the wood. He had gotten the scar years ago. A stupid mistake with a branding iron during a roundup in Texas. Just ranch work, he said, pulling his sleeve down. She shook her head, her gaze steady. No, the others, she gestured to his hands, cut and calloused. They are work, that one. It is different. She looked at his face. You have the same look as Naichi, like you are always waiting for the next bad thing. Luke turned away, bracing the post. You talk too much. You do not talk enough, she replied, so softly he barely heard it. You are running, like us. He stopped. He turned to face her. The sun was behind her, making a halo of her dark hair. Her quiet, haunted eyes saw right through his defenses. He had lied to Naichi, telling her it was ranchers. But this gentle woman, she was asking for the truth. Yeah, he said, his voice rough. I am running, from a lawman, and a posse. I killed a man in Tucson. A boy, really, he drew on me. But it does not matter. He is dead. He had not said it aloud since he had confessed to Naichi in his fever. Saying it now, to Alonza, felt different. It felt like a stone dropping from his own chest. She did not recoil. She did not look at him with horror. She just nodded, as if he had confirmed what she already knew. So you carry ghosts, too, she said. Before he could answer, a sharp voice cut through the air. Alonza, get away from him! Taya was striding toward them, her face a mask of fury. She had been watching them from the hut. He is poisoning you. He is a Pindaliko-yi, a white-eye. He lies. Taya, no, Alonza said, stepping back, her voice pleading. He is a spy, Taya spat, her gaze locking on Luke. He watches us. He makes you talk. He finds our weaknesses. He is waiting. Maybe his soldier friends are coming. That is not true, Luke said, holding his hands up, trying to keep his voice calm. I am just working. I mean you no harm. Liar, she shrieked. Her grief and rage, kept simmering for 5 years, boiled over. She saw him, and she saw every soldier, every white man who had ever broken her world. That evening, the fragile peace was shattered. Luke sat by the fire, cleaning his revolver. Naichi had given it back to him 2 days before, along with his gun belt, a silent acknowledgement of his work. He was cleaning the dust from the action, the ritual comforting. When Taya marched out of the hut, her eyes were wild. She stopped in front of him, trembling. Spy, she hissed. You wait until we trust you. Then you will kill us, too. Taya, I am not... Before he could finish, she moved like a snake. She snatched the heavy Colt revolver from his hands. The metal was dark and oiled. You are one of them? She screamed, her voice cracking with a pain so deep it was terrifying. You are a soldier, Come back to finish us. You will not use this on us." And with a scream of pure, undiluted rage, she hurled the gun. It flew in a dark arc and landed square in the center of the blazing fire. Something inside Luke snapped. It was not just the gun, it was the injustice. It was the accusation. It was the memory of Tucson, the shame of his weakness, the days of running. He roared, a guttural sound that was not human, and he lunged at her. He was bigger, stronger, and in that second, he was blind with a rage that matched her own. He raised his hand to strike her. He stopped. His fist was inches from her face, trembling with the force of his anger. Taya had flinched, her eyes squeezed shut, but she did not back down. She stood her ground, ready for the blow, her face a defiant mask of hatred. In the sudden, terrible silence, Luke heard a sound, a small, terrified cry. "Alonza." She was standing in the doorway of the hut, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with a familiar, heartbreaking terror. And then he heard the click. Nietzsche was standing just behind Alonza, the long barrel of her rifle leveled at Luke's heart. Her face was not angry. It was cold, steady, and utterly resolved. The rage drained out of Luke, leaving him cold and sick. He looked at his own raised fist. He looked at Taya's defiant face, streaked with tears he had not seen. He looked at Alonza, who was weeping silently, and he looked at Nietzsche, who was ready to kill him. He had terrified them. He had become the very monster they feared. He was no different from the soldiers, no different from the men at the trading post. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered his hand. He started, but no words came. He turned, his whole body shaking, and walked away from the fire. He stumbled past the woodpile and leaned his forehead against the cold, rough adobe wall of the hut. He was sick. He retched, coughing up the bitter taste of his own shame. He stayed there for a long time, listening to the crackle of the fire and the low, urgent sounds of the women talking in their own language. He had broken the truce. He had proven Taya right. After an hour, when the canyon was dark and the stars were bright, he forced himself to move. He walked back to the fire pit. Taya and Alonza were on their sleeping pallets inside, their backs to the door. The gun was gone from the fire. Nietzsche sat where she always sat, on her stool by the embers. She was holding the revolver. It was blackened, warped by the heat, the wooden grip charred. It was ruined. She did not look at him as he sat on the ground across the fire from her. "She is young," Nietzsche said, her voice flat, as if speaking to the night air. "Her husband, he was not killed, not at first. The soldiers, they left him by the creek. She sat with him for 2 days while he died. She carries much anger." Luke said nothing. He stared at the glowing embers. "You are strong now," Nietzsche continued, her voice hardening. "You are not the sick man who crawled here, but you are still a white man. You carry your own anger." She finally looked at him, her eyes as dark and cold as the ruined metal in her lap. "If you ever, raise your hand to one of them again," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more threatening than a shout. "If you hurt any of us, we will not wait for you to die in the sun. We will bury you where no one finds you." He nodded, unable to speak. He deserved the threat. The next day, the air was thick. Luke kept his distance. He worked, chopping wood with a ferocious, silent energy, splitting root after root, his shoulders aching, his palms blistering again. He was working off his debt. He was working off his guilt. He was waiting to be told to leave, a ruined gun his only payment. But Nietzsche did not tell him to go. He was still too weak to survive the desert, and she knew it. And the woodpile was growing larger than it had ever been. The goat's corral was sturdy. He had fixed the roof, a fragile, ugly piece settled, built not on trust, but on mutual, unspoken need. He needed their shelter. They needed his labor. Weeks passed. The sharp edges of that night began to blur. The rhythm of the canyon took hold of him. He woke to the sound of Alonza's grinding stone. He smelled the mesquite smoke and the scent of Taya's herb gathering, sharp and clean. He listened to the steady thwack-thwack of the beater as Naichi and Alonza worked the loom. He was a fixture now. He was the man who chopped the wood, the man who sat by the fire, staring into it, the man who had nightmares. They had all heard him, the moans, the way he would cry out, "No, no," in his sleep. One night, the moon was a sliver. The canyon floor plunged into a deep, starless black. He was back in Tucson. The boy's face was there, pale and surprised, the red stain spreading. Killer, the word echoed. Killer, spy, white eye. He thrashed on his pallet, his hand groping for the gun that was no longer there. "I did not mean it," he moaned, his voice thick with sleep and terror. "God, please, I did not—" A sound pulled him from the edge of the nightmare. He woke with a gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs, his skin cold with sweat. He was not alone. In the pitch dark, a shape was kneeling beside him. He flinched, his hand coming up to defend himself. "Shh," a voice whispered. It was Alonza. She had been drawn by his cries. He could just make out her silhouette against the slightly less dark rectangle of the doorway. He froze, ashamed. He had shown her his rage, and now he was showing her his weakness. He expected her to back away, afraid, but she did not move. He could hear her breathing, slow and steady. She had seen this before. She lived with ghosts. He lay there, trembling, waiting for her to leave. Instead, in the absolute darkness, she reached out, her hand, small and warm from her blankets, found his chest. She laid it flat, right over his pounding heart. It was not a lover's touch. It was not pity. It was a gesture of simple, profound stillness. It was a hand that said, "I am here. I see you. You are not alone." Luke stopped shaking. He did not move. He did not speak. He just lay there, breathing, feeling the steady, living pressure of her hand. The nightmare receded. The faces of the dead pulled back into the shadows. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he had run from Tucson, he was not alone with what he had done. The canyon had become a bubble of fragile peace, but a bubble was meant to burst. The outside world had not forgotten them. It had only been waiting. The intrusion began, as it always did. At the trading post, Naichi and Taya returned from their monthly trek to the settlement, their faces tight and gray. They had walked the 12 miles, traded 2 fine rugs, and returned with less flour and salt than the month before. But this time, they brought back something else, fear. Luke was checking the goat corral, his strength long since returned, his body lean and hard from the steady work. He saw them come down the narrow path, walking too fast, Taya's shoulders rigid. "They know," Naichi said as she passed him, not stopping, heading straight for the adobe hut. Luke followed. "Know what?" Naichi dropped the light sack of supplies by the hearth. Alonza looked up from her weaving, her hands freezing on the loom. "Sutton, the trader." Naichi's voice was clipped. "He asked questions. He asked why we needed so much flour. We bought men's bootlaces last time. He remembered. He said he heard voices," Taya added, her voice sharp with fury. She slammed a small tin of beans onto the floor. "He said, 'You widows keeping a man out there?' He laughed." "He told us," Naichi said, turning to Luke, her eyes dark, "that some of the hands from the Cross Creek Ranch were riding south, looking for strays. He told them about the smoke from this canyon. He told them about us." A cold dread settled in Luke's stomach. It was the same feeling he had in Tucson, the moment before the cards hit the table. "Ranchers," he said. "They are white men," Taya spat. "They are all the same. They will come." Alonza stood up from the loom, her face pale. "Naiche, what will they do?" "They will see him," Naichi said, nodding at Luke. They will see a white man living with Apache widows. They will not understand. They will correct it. The word correct hung in the small room, thick and ugly. It meant fire. It meant ruin. They will think we are bad, Alonza whispered, her eyes filling with tears. They will say we are harlots. They will drive us out. Or worse, Taya said, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. They will take us. Panic, cold and sharp, filled the hut. Taya began to gather dried corn into a blanket, her movements jerky. We have to go. We have to hide. Up in the high caves. We cannot live in the caves, Naichi said, her voice weary. Not forever. They are coming for me, Luke said, his voice quiet but heavy. The women stopped. It is not you they are angry at. It is me. I am the one who does not belong. You are right, Taya hissed. You brought this. Taya, Naiche warned. No, she is right, Luke said. He looked at the three of them, Naiche, strong and broken, Taya, full of fire and grief, Alonza, whose hand on his chest had pulled him from a nightmare. He had brought the world's judgment to their door. I will not have you run. I will not have them burn your corn. I will handle it. Handle it? Naichi looked at him. How? Your gun is gone. They will be 4, maybe 5. They will have rifles. They are not soldiers, Luke said, though it was small comfort. They are ranch hands. I know their kind. They are looking for trouble, but they are not looking for a war. I will meet them. I will tell them I am just passing through, that I forced you to give me shelter. I will. I will make them believe I am leaving. They will kill you, Alonza said, her voice trembling. They might, Luke said simply. But I will meet them at the canyon mouth, away from the hut, away from the corn. He looked at Naichi. I will not let them burn this place. You will stay inside, all of you. Bar the door. No matter what you hear, do you understand? Naichi studied his face, her own etched with a deep, pragmatic sorrow. She saw his resolve. She had seen him heal, seen him work. She had seen him almost strike Taya, and she had seen his shame afterward. She did not trust him fully, but she knew, in this moment, he was not lying. She gave a single, curt nod. We will stay. They did not have to wait long. 2 days later, in the heavy heat of the afternoon, they heard it. The jingle of harness, the crunch of shod hooves on the rock-strewn path leading into the canyon. It was a sound of ownership, arrogant and loud. Alonza muffled a cry. Taya grabbed the old rifle, her knuckles white. Inside, Luke ordered, Now, bar the door. Naichi pushed the other 2 women into the hut. Her eyes met Luke's for 1 second. It was not a look of hope. It was a shared look of dread. The door closed. He heard the heavy wooden bars slide into place. He was alone. He walked to the center of the canyon opening, his hands empty, his heart pounding a slow, heavy beat against his ribs. He stood between the intruders and the small adobe home, his back to the green patch of corn. 4 riders emerged from the narrow pass. They were just as he had pictured, young, dirty, confident. They wore cattlemen's hats and carried repeating rifles in their scabbards. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a sun-scorched face and a mean squint, pulled his horse up, his eyes taking in Luke, the hut, the corn, the well. Well, now, the man drawled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Look what we found. Boys, Sutton was right. A little nest. The other 3 fanned out, their horses restless. What do you want? Luke called out, his voice steady. What do we want? The leader laughed. We are looking for stray cattle, but it looks like we found a stray white man instead. What is your name? Friend. I am just passing through, Luke said, ignoring the question. Got turned around in the desert. These women gave me water. I will be leaving come morning. The leader. Silas narrowed his eyes. Passing through. You look settled in. You look like you have been eating their corn. He looked pointedly at the new wood stacked by the wall. Chopping their wood. Getting real cozy. Are you? One of the younger men chuckled. Heard Apache widows are grateful. Silas. Maybe he is just paying for his keep. The men laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. Luke's hands clenched into fists. You have no business here. This is their land. Right out. The humor vanished from Silas's face. Their land? This ain't their land. This is Arizona territory. This land belongs to decent folk, not this. He gestured to the hut. And it sure as hell does not belong to a man who beds down with them. You make me sick. He swung down from his horse. The other three followed, grabbing their rifles. You look familiar, Silas said, walking closer, circling Luke like a coyote. You got the look of a man on the run. What'd you do, kill someone? That is my business, Luke said. Maybe it is, Silas sneered. But this is our business. We do not like white men turning savage. He stopped, his face inches from Luke's. You are savage bred now, ain't you? Eating their food, forgetting your own kind. They are just trying to live, Luke said, his voice low and tight. They do not bother anyone. They bother me, Silas said. They bother any God-fearing man, and this patch of corn, it is an insult on land that should be grazed. He turned to his men. Boys, tear it up, burn the hut. We are cleaning this canyon out. One of the men started toward the corn patch, his rifle held loosely. No, Luke said. The man stopped. What you say? I said no. Luke moved, planting himself between the man and the corn. You are not touching it. You are not touching them. You ride out now, or you will deal with me. Silas stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. Then he burst out laughing. Deal with you? You and what army? You ain't even armed. He saw the empty holster on Luke's hip. The laughter grew meaner. You are one pathetic creature, ain't you? You are their man, and you cannot even carry a gun. I am telling you, Luke said, his entire body tense. Leave, now! Or what? Silas challenged. Luke did not answer with words. He threw a punch. It was a clean, hard right hook, fueled by weeks of shame and anger. It caught Silas square on the jaw, sending him stumbling back into the dust. For a second, there was only shocked silence. Then the other three men surged forward. Luke was not a brawler, but he had been in his share of fights. He spun, driving his elbow into the gut of the first man, dropping him. He turned to meet the second, but the third man brought the butt of his rifle down hard, striking Luke across the back of his shoulders. The blow sent him to his knees, his vision exploding in white stars. He tried to rise, but Silas was back, his face crimson with rage. Silas kicked him, hard, in the ribs. Luke heard, or maybe felt, a crack. The air rushed out of his lungs. You hit me, you... Silas was too furious to speak. He just kicked again. Luke curled up, his arms over his head, the dust filling his mouth and nose. He was a fool. He was alone, unarmed, and he had picked a fight with 4 men. But as the boots rained down, a strange, grim satisfaction filled him. He was not running. He was not in a nightmare. He was here. He was taking the blows. They were thorough. They kicked his ribs, his back, his legs. They were cowboys, and their boots were heavy. That is enough, Silas, one of the men finally said, his voice nervous. You will kill him. He deserves it, Silas spat, but he stopped kicking. He was breathing hard. He wiped the blood from his own split lip. Luke lay in the dust, trying to draw a breath. Every part of him was on fire. Let him be a lesson, Silas said, his voice full. A lesson to him and a lesson to them. He pointed to the hut. We will be back. If he is still here, We will burn this place to the ground, and him with it. Understand me? In there, he shouted at the barred door. He spat in the dust near Luke's head.
Let us go, boys. He ain't worth a bullet.
Luke heard them mount up. He heard the sound of their horses, the jingle of their spurs, fading down the canyon pass. He was left alone in the silence, tasting his own blood. He did not know how long he lay there. It felt like an hour. The world was a haze of red rock and blue sky, spinning slowly. Then he heard the sound of the bar being lifted from the door. He tried to push himself up, to show them he was not broken, but a sharp, white-hot pain in his side dropped him back with a groan. He heard Taya's sharp, indrawn breath. He heard Alanza begin to weep, a low, choked sound. Then a shadow fell over him. It was Naichi. She knelt beside him in the dust, her face as still and carved as the canyon walls. She had a bowl of water and a strip of cloth.
They are gone, he managed to rasp, spitting out bloody dust.
For now, she said. She dipped the cloth in the water and began to wash the blood and grime from a cut over his eye. Her touch was not gentle. It was practical, rough, and efficient. Alanza knelt on his other side, her hands trembling. Useless. He is hurt. Naichi, he is breathing. Naichi cut her off. Taya stood behind them, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on Luke's battered face. She was not angry. She looked confused. Naichi cleaned the cut. Luke winced, his whole body a single knot of pain. They did not touch the corn, he whispered. Naichi stopped. Her hand, holding the bloody cloth, was still. She looked from his face to the corn patch, untouched. She looked at the hut, unburned. She looked back at him. You are a fool, she said, her voice low. You should have hidden with us. They would have burned it all, he said. He tried to sit up, but the pain in his ribs made him cry out. Be still. She pushed him back down, more gently this time. You have broken ribs. You are a fool, she repeated, but the words had less bite. She worked in silence for a few minutes, cleaning the worst of the cuts. He was a mess of bruises and blood. Finally, she leaned back on her heels. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the tops of the cliffs in fire. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why did you do this? They are your people. They would have taken you in. Why stay here? Why fight for us? Luke looked past her, at the adobe hut. He thought of the weeks of peace. He thought of the smell of mesquite smoke, the sound of the loom, the feel of Alanza's hand on his chest. He thought of Tucson, of the dead boy, of his dead horse. He thought of the world outside this canyon, a world that wanted him dead or in chains. He turned his gaze back to Naichi. Her hard, dark eyes were asking for a truth he had not even spoken to himself. Because they are not my people, he rasped. Not anymore. He took a ragged breath, the pain sharp. And I had nowhere else to run, because I've got nowhere left that isn't burned. Naichi stared at him. The silence stretched, the distance between them, the chasm of race and history, of white man and Apache, suddenly shrank. She was not looking at a Pindaliko Yi. She was looking at another exile. She was looking at a man who, like her, had been pushed to the very last edge of the world, to a small patch of dirt in a hidden canyon. Her expression softened. The iron in her spine did not bend, but the brittle anger around it seemed to dissolve. She saw him. Alanza, she said, her voice firm. Help me. We must get him inside. The next day, Luke was lying on his pallet, his ribs tightly bound, his body a map of purple and black bruises. He was weak, but he was alive. He heard movement. He opened his eyes. Taya was standing over him. Her usual scowl was gone, replaced by a deep, troubled uncertainty. He tensed, expecting an insult. She stood there for a long moment, as if arguing with herself. Then, her movements quick and angry. She reached into the small pouch at her belt. She pushed something into his hand, her rough fingers closing his own over it. "Here," she muttered, refusing to meet his eyes. He opened his hand. It was a small, beaded charm, sewn onto a piece of worn buckskin. It was a lizard, black and blue beads, crafted with skill. "My husband," Taya said, the word catching in her throat. "He made it before the raid. He said it was for strength, to protect." Luke stared at the charm. It was the first gift he had been given in years. It was the first sign of trust from her. "Taya, he started. "Just take it," she snapped, her old anger flaring to cover her embarrassment. "You are a fool. You will need it." She spun and stalked out of the hut, leaving Luke closing his hand around the small, powerful offering. Life resumed, but it was different. The fight had changed the air in the canyon. He was no longer a guest, a burden, or a prisoner. He was a fixture. He was, in a strange and unspoken way, one of them. As his ribs healed, he returned to his work, but his work was now theirs. He and Naichi rebuilt the goat corral fence, making it stronger, higher. He helped Alonza and Taya clear a new, small patch of ground, pulling stubborn rocks from the soil to plant more beans. He taught Taya how to set better snares for rabbits, and he showed Naichi how to brace the loom so it did not shudder. He patrolled the canyon rim every evening, not just as a chore, but as a watchman. He was protecting his... He stopped himself. It was not his home, but it was his refuge. The intimacy of their small space grew. The hut was tiny. At night, they were separated by only a few feet of packed earth. The loneliness that had defined all of them began to blur. The sharp edges of their separate griefs started to soften. He grew used to the scent of them, the wood smoke in Naichi's clothes, the faint, dusty smell of herbs that clung to Taya, the clean, sweet scent of yucca soap in Alonza's hair. He heard them breathe in their sleep. And his awareness of Alonza became a constant, low thrum. It was in the way she handed him a cup of water, her fingers brushing his. It was in the way she watched him work, her haunted eyes now holding a different, softer light. It was in the memory of her hand on his chest. The desire, when it came, was not a sudden fire. It was a slow warmth, like an ember buried in ash. It was tangled with guilt. He was a white man, a killer. She was an Apache widow. He was a ghost, and so was she. But they were alive, and they were desperately lonely. One night, the moon was full, flooding the canyon with a light so bright it was like a false, silver day. He could not sleep. His ribs ached. He sat outside the hut, his back against the cool adobe, staring at the shadows. He heard the door creak. Alonza emerged, her hair unbound, falling over her shoulders in a dark wave. She did not seem surprised to see him. She sat near him, pulling her blanket around her. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the moon. "You should go," she whispered, her voice so low it was almost part of the wind. "Silas, he will come back." "Let him," Luke said. "He will kill you this time, and he will hurt us." "I will not let him," Luke said. "How?" she asked, a terrible sadness in her voice. "You are one man. They are many. They have the world on their side." She turned to him, her face pale and lovely in the moonlight. "You are a good man, Luke Barringer. You should not die here." He laughed, a bitter, quiet sound. "I am not a good man. Alonza, you saw my nightmare. You heard the truth. I am a killer." "No," she said. She reached out, her fingers hesitant, and touched the fresh scar on his cheekbone, left by Silas's boot. A killer would have run. A killer would have let them burn the corn. You are just lost." Her touch was soft, a spark on his skin. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the grief that still lived in her eyes, but he also saw a woman, warm and alive. He saw her mourning, and it matched his own. He did not plan it. He did not think. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. Their lips met. It was hesitant, shy. It tasted of dust and wood smoke and 5 years of solitude. It was not a kiss of passion, but of desperate, shared mourning. It was a kiss that said, "I am so lonely. I am so afraid. You are here." Then the desperation took over. He put his hand on her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened, becoming hungry. A desperate affirmation that they were still alive, that they could still feel. She returned it, her hands clutching his shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. They broke apart, breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other. Ashamed, startled, and terrified. A shadow fell over them. They looked up. Nietzsche stood in the doorway, her figure a black cutout against the dim firelight inside. She was not holding a rifle. Her hands were empty. Her face was not angry. It was infinitely weary. Alanza gasped, scrambling to her feet. She looked at Nietzsche, her face stricken with guilt, and then she fled, disappearing into the darkness of the hut. Luke stood up slowly, his heart sinking. "Nietzsche," he began, "Do not," she said, her voice flat, cutting him off. She stepped out into the moonlight, her gaze hard. "Do not make promises here. Luke Berenger." "I did not," he said, his voice rough. I know what I saw," Nietzsche said. She looked at him, the man she had patched up, the man Taya had trusted. "I know what it means. You are lonely. She is lonely. But you are not the same."
"What does that mean?"
"It means you are a white man," she said, her voice dropping to that pragmatic, cold level he knew so well. "This canyon, it is a place for you to heal. It is a place to hide, but it is not your home." "It feels more like a home than any place I have known," he said, the truth of it surprising him. Nietzsche shook her head, a small, sad gesture. "You think that now, but one day you will be strong. The trouble in Tucson will fade. You will miss your whiskey. You will miss your own kind. You will hear of a life you can have again." "That is not true," he insisted. "It is," she said, her certainty a cold stone. "You will go back to your people someday. You will leave, and Alanza will be here. You will make her hope for a life she cannot have. You will break her, and we will still be ghosts." She turned and went back inside the hut, leaving him alone in the cold silver light, the taste of Alanza on his lips, the truth of Nietzsche's words freezing his blood. Nietzsche's words had drawn a line in the sand. "You will go back," she had said, and that line, invisible but sharp as glass, now divided the small adobe hut. The kiss, which had felt like the first real thing to happen to Luke in years, now felt like a theft. Alanza was ashamed. She would not meet his eyes. She busied herself at the loom, her back to him, her movements small and tight. When he spoke to her, she would answer in a whisper, her gaze fixed on the threads. The air in the hut, once thick with shared grief and unspoken need, was now brittle with a new, sharp tension. Luke felt Nietzsche's warning like a brand. You will break her. The truth of it made him angry, and it made him ashamed. He was a drifter. He was a man with blood on his hands. What right did he have to offer anything but more trouble? He threw himself into the work, chopping wood with a contained fury, hauling rocks to reinforce the corn patch, his muscles straining. He was trying to work the longing out of his own body. But it did not work. Love, he was discovering, was not a thing that listened to reason. It was a weed that grew in the driest, most hostile soil. His feelings for Alanza were no longer just a spark of shared loneliness. It was in the way he knew the sound of her breathing in the dark. It was in the way his body tensed when she walked past, the scent of yucca and dust filling his senses. He found himself watching her hands as she wove, marveling at their quick, gentle strength. He knew he was in love, and he knew it was a disaster. The conflict simmered, drawing Taya and Naichi into its pull. Taya saw it all. She saw Alonza's averted face and Luke's frustrated silence. Her bitterness, which had softened after the fight with Silas, returned with a new, sharp edge. But it was not aimed at Luke this time. It was aimed at Alonza. "You are a fool," Taya hissed at her one afternoon at the well, just loud enough for Luke to overhear from the corral. "He is a white man. He has a white man's promises. They are water. They are smoke. You are forgetting your husband. You are forgetting what they did." "He is not them," Alonza whispered, her voice trembling. "He is them," Taya snapped. "He has their eyes. He has their smell. And you look at him like a sick dog. You shame us. You shame the dead." Alonza fled, her water jug half full. Taya stood watching her face a mask of jealous, protective rage. Luke realized Taya's anger was not just about him. It was about loyalty. It was about Alonza breaking the pact of their shared widowhood. Taya was terrified of losing the only family she had left to the very thing that had destroyed them. Naichi's struggle was quieter, but deeper. She was the leader, and she had to be practical. She had to protect her small, broken family. But she was also a woman, and she had been alone for 5 hard years. She would watch Luke as he worked, his shirt soaked with sweat, his muscles defined by the labor he gave them. She would watch him in the evenings as he sat staring into the fire, his profile hard and lonely in the flicker. Luke would catch her gaze sometimes, in her eyes. He saw not just the burden of leadership, but a flash of something else, a buried, banked fire of her own longing. She was not jealous of Alonza. She was afraid for her. But beneath that fear, Luke saw a deep, profound exhaustion, the weariness of a woman who had carried everything by herself for too long. He saw, briefly, what she might have been before the world had demanded she be made of iron. He began to see them clearly, not as a group, but as 3 separate, fierce survivors. He saw Naichi, sitting with their meager store of dried corn, counting every kernel, rationing their future with a leader's grim resolve. Her survival was in her mind, in her relentless, forward-thinking practicality. She was the rock that held them all from washing away. He saw Alonza, who took the dress Taya had torn in her anger and mended it with stitches so fine the tear was invisible. She tended the small patch of herbs, her hands gentle, her touch bringing life from the dust. Her survival was in her tenderness, in her quiet refusal to let the world make her hard. She was the water, patiently wearing down the stone. And he saw Taya returning from a 3-day hunt in the high rocks, her face scratched, her boots torn, but a lean pronghorn buck slung over her shoulders. She had hunted it with a fury, a defiant rage against the starvation that threatened them. Her survival was in her anger. It was the fire that kept them warm. Leadership, tenderness, and fury. Each woman had her own weapon, her own way of fighting the desert and their grief. The tension between them finally broke, but not in the way Luke expected. It was a hot, still night, weeks after the kiss. The air was heavy, the moon a dull copper. They had eaten, a thin stew of Taya's rabbit and Alonza's herbs. They sat around the fire, the silence stretching, tight and uncomfortable. Taya suddenly threw the bone she was holding into the embers. "He used to sing," she said, her voice rough. Naiche and Alonza looked up, startled. Taya rarely spoke of her husband. "Who?" Alonza asked softly. "Connie." Taya spat the name like a curse, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He was a fool. He thought his songs could stop bullets. He was singing when they rode in. He was not a good hunter. He was always breaking the snares. But he could sing. He sang about the hawk and the snake. She stared into the fire. He was singing when I found him by the creek. The song, it was just blood in his throat. The confession, so raw and sudden, ripped the veil from their grief. Alonza began to weep, low, racking sobs she had held in for weeks. He was so quiet, she whispered, speaking of her own husband, Lozin. He was a tracker. He could read the ground like a book. He said he would always find me. The night before the raid, he gave me a feather. He said, she choked on a sob. He said to hold it, and he would find me. I lost it. When we ran, I lost the feather. Luke sat frozen, a silent witness. This was holy ground. Naichi did not cry. She looked at the fire, her strong hands clasped in her lap. Tala, she said, her voice flat, the name of her husband. He was a leader, he was strong, but he was proud. I told him, I said, the Pinda Liko Yi are coming, too many. We must go up into the mountains. He would not listen. He said, this is our land. We do not run. She closed her eyes for a moment. He met them at the canyon mouth. He held them off. He bought us the time to run. He knew he would die. His pride killed him, and his pride saved us. She opened her eyes. They were dry, but they held the emptiness of the entire desert. He was a good man and a fool. They are all dead, and we are here. The three women sat in a triangle of shared loss, their stories hanging in the smoke. Luke looked at them, and for the first time, he understood. He was not just living with three widows. He was living with the ghosts of three men. This canyon was not a refuge. It was a memorial. It was the place they had run to, the place where their old lives had ended and this new, hard life had begun. The grief that bound them was a cord thicker than blood, and he was an outsider, tangled in it. He felt a profound, aching sorrow, not for himself, but for them, for the love they had lost, and for the love he had clumsily tried to start. The world seemed to hold its breath for a week. Then the sky broke. It came without warning. The copper moon had turned a sick, greenish yellow. The air became so still it felt hard to breathe. Then the wind came, a blast of hot air that sounded like a scream. And then the rain. It was not rain. It was a wall of water, a flash flood roaring down the dry arroyo that led to their canyon. They had only moments. The hut! Naichi screamed. Get inside. They scrambled in, barring the door. Just as the water hit, it was a deafening roar, the sound of 1,000 tons of rock and water scouring the canyon. The small adobe hut trembled. Water began to pour through the roof, the one Luke had so carefully mended. Taya and Alonza cried out in terror. Luke and Naichi stood, their hands pressed against the shuddering door, as if they could hold the flood back through force of will. It lasted for an hour, and then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. They opened the door to a world remade and ruined. The moon shone down on a landscape of liquid mud and shattered rock. The corn patch was gone. Their entire crop, every stalk they had coaxed from the dry earth, was buried under 2 feet of sludge and gravel. The well was a foul, churning pit of brown water. The pen for the goats had been smashed, the animals washed away. No, Alonza whispered, sinking to her knees in the mud. No, no. Taya walked in a daze to where the corn had been, her feet sinking deep. She bent, pulled up a broken stalk, and screamed at the sky, a sound of such pure, hopeless rage that it made Luke's blood run cold. Naichi stood by the door, her face gray. She looked at their stores, stacked inside. The cornmeal is wet, she said, her voice dead. It will mold. We have nothing. The jerky is gone. The roots, all gone. They were starving. The desert had given them a reprieve, and the desert had taken it back. I will go, Luke said, his voice cutting through their despair. The 3 women turned to him. Go where? Nietzsche asked.
The settlement, Sutton's Post. I have to get supplies. Flour, beans, salt. We will not starve here.
You cannot, Nietzsche said, her voice sharp. Silas, his men, they will be there. They will be watching for you. They said they would kill you. They will not expect me to walk in. Luke said, I will go at night. I will trade something. He looked around the ruined hut. They had nothing. The loom was soaked, the rug on it a ruined mess of muddy thread. I will go, Taya said, her voice hard. They will not hurt a woman. After last time? Nietzsche said. Sutton's son. He will not let you leave. She looked at Luke, her eyes filled with a new, terrible dread. It was the dread of a leader with no options. I am the only one. Luke said, I am a man. I can get work, or I can get credit. You stay here. Bar the door. I will be back. I promise. Alonza looked at him, her eyes wide with terror. You will not come back, she whispered. They will take you. He walked to her, ignoring Nietzsche's sharp look. He took her hands. They were cold, covered in mud. I will come back, he said, looking into her eyes. I promise. He turned to Taya. That charm, the one for strength. Can I borrow it? Taya stared at him, then nodded, her anger replaced by a grim fear. She took it from her own neck and handed it to him. He had no horse, no gun. It was 12 miles. He took the last of their silver coins, a heavy piece that Nietzsche had kept hidden in a crack in the wall. He took a knife, and as the sun began to rise, painting the muddy ruins in a sickly pink, he began to walk. He walked all day, staying low in the arroyos, avoiding the ridges. His shoulder, where Silas's men had kicked him, ached, but the thought of Alanza's face, of Taya's scream, of Nietzsche's deadened eyes, kept him moving. He reached the settlement after dark. It was just a trading post, a saloon, and a blacksmith's shop. He hid in the shadows, waiting. He saw Silas's horse tied outside the saloon. He waited for hours, his stomach clenched, until Silas and his men rode out, drunk and loud. Then he moved. He went to the back of Sutton's trading post. He had a plan. He was not here to trade. He was here to take. He would steal what they needed. It was the only way. He was jimmying the back window when a voice from the darkness made his heart stop. Looking for something, son? A man stepped out from the shadow of the water barrel, a lantern in one hand, a shotgun in the other. He was older, with a gray mustache and a tarnished star pinned to his vest, a deputy marshal. Luke froze. He knew that face. He had seen it in Tucson. The deputy raised the lantern. The light fell on Luke's face. The man's eyes widened, first in surprise, then in cold recognition. Well, I will be. The deputy said, his voice flat. Luke Berenger, I heard you ran south. Did not think you were stupid enough to rob a trading post. I am just... Luke started, his hands slowly rising. Save it, the deputy said. I was in Tucson. I saw what was left of Billy Hazlitt. His PA has a $500 bounty on your head. You are under arrest for the murder of Billy Hazlitt. He drew on me, Luke said, his voice low. It was a fair fight. You tell that to the judge. The deputy gestured with the shotgun. Turn around, hands behind your back. Luke's mind raced. He thought of the canyon. He thought of Alonza. He thought of his promise. He was not going to hang for a fight he did not start. He looked past the deputy, his eyes widening. Silas, what are you... It was a stupid trick, but the deputy was a lawman, and Silas was a known problem. He half-turned. It was all Luke needed. He lunged, not at the man, but at the lantern. He smashed it with his fist. Oil and flame erupted. The deputy shouted, firing the shotgun into the air as he stumbled back. Luke ran. He ran for the saloon's tie rail. He had to get a horse. He heard the deputy shouting, "Stop! Stop, or I will shoot!" Men were pouring out of the saloon. Luke saw a single horse, a bay mare, still saddled. He vaulted onto its back, kicking his heels into its sides.
"It is Berenger, the murderer!"
the deputy yelled.
"Stop him!"
A shot rang out, and another. Luke felt a searing, white-hot fire rip through his left shoulder. The force of it almost knocked him from the saddle. He grabbed the pommel, his arm suddenly useless, blood pouring down his sleeve. He spurred the horse, hard, leaning low over its neck. He rode out of the settlement, the shouts and gunfire fading behind him. The ride back was a nightmare. He was bleeding, badly. The night blurred. He clung to the horse, his blood leaving a dark trail on the sand. The pain was a living thing, a fire that consumed him. He thought of Alonza. "I promise." He kept whispering it, "I promise." He must have passed out. He woke when the horse stopped, its sides heaving. He was at the mouth of the canyon. He looked down. His shirt was a solid mass of black, sticky blood. He tried to swing his leg over, but his strength was gone. He slid, collapsing from the saddle, and hit the damp sand with a thud. The horse, spooked, ran off. He lay there, the world spinning. He saw them, 3 figures, dark against the gray dawn sky, running toward him. He heard Alonza scream his name. "He is bleeding!" Taya's voice, sharp with panic. "Inside, now. Taya, get the rifle. Watch the pass. Alonza, the bandages. Now!" Naichi's voice, the leader, back in command. They dragged him, his boots leaving 2 trails in the mud. They pulled him into the hut. The pain was unbearable. He blacked out. He drifted, in and out. He was on his pallet. The hut was dark, filled with shadows and whispers. "Follow the blood," Taya was saying, her voice hard. "They will come. They know where he ran." "We hide him," Alonza wept. "In the caves. They will not find him." "He is dying," Naichi's voice, flat and cold. "And they will find us. They will find us, and they will see him. And they will correct it. They will burn us out. Or worse." "What do we do?" Taya asked. We should send him away. Leave him before they come." "No!" Alonza cried. "We cannot. He... Luke opened his eyes, or thought he did. He was burning up. The wound was fire. Through a red haze, he saw the 3 women. They were trapped. He had brought his past, his violence, his blood, to their door. He had kept his promise, but he had doomed them all. Alonza was weeping quietly, her face pressed into her hands. Taya stood by the door, the moonlight catching the steel of her knife as she sharpened it. The sound, a rhythmic, menacing shing. Shing, shing. She was preparing for a fight she could not win. And Naichi was kneeling by the fire. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the embers. She began to speak, her voice low. A chant. It was not English. It was her own tongue. She was praying. Luke, in his delirium, understood. She was not praying for him to live. She was not praying for deliverance. It was a prayer of surrender. She was giving him up to the spirits. She was giving them all up. He closed his eyes. He was trapped. They were trapped. And the law, with all its righteous fury, was coming with the sun. The sun rose on a world of mud. The flood had scoured the canyon, leaving behind a thick, stinking layer of brown sludge and gravel. The corn was gone, buried. The well was a pit of filth. The goats were gone. Luke lay on his pallet inside the damp, damaged hut. His shoulder a universe of fire. The bullet had gone clean through, but it had taken his strength with it. He was weak, fevered, and he had failed. He had brought back no food, and he had brought the law. They did not speak of it. Their shock was too deep, a silence heavier than the muddy earth. Alonza moved like a ghost, her face pale, tending to his wound with shaking hands. Taya stood at the canyon mouth, the old rifle in her grip, watching the pass, her body a rigid line of defiance. Naichi, her face carved from granite, sifted through their ruined supplies, her lips moving in a silent, grim calculation. They had salvaged a few handfuls of wet cornmeal, enough for a day, maybe two. "They will come," Taya said, her voice flat, not looking back. The blood trail was clear. The rain did not wash it all.
"They will come for him,"
Naichi said, her gaze falling on Luke. Luke tried to push himself up. I will go. I will meet them. I will.
"You will die,"
Naichi said, her voice devoid of pity. "You cannot walk." "Leave me," Luke whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Taya is right. They will come. They will find me here, and they will punish you. You have to drag me out. Leave me." Alonza let out a choked sob, her hand flying to her mouth. "No," Taya said. She walked back from the pass, her eyes burning with a cold, clear fury. She was not angry at him. She was angry at the world. "We do not leave our dead." "He's not dead," Alonza whispered. "He is ours," Taya stated, as if it were a fact of the earth. "He fought Silas. He bled. He is ours. We do not leave him." Naiche looked at Taya, a flicker of surprise in her hard eyes. The bond had been forged. "Then we hide him," Naichi decided. Her voice was firm. "The leader again. The high caves, where we keep the sacred things. They will not look there." It was an agony. It took both Alonza and Taya to half drag, half carry him. He tried to walk, his legs buckling, the pain in his shoulders so bright he almost blacked out. They hauled him up the narrow, rocky path to the small caves hidden near the canyon rim, a place he had never been allowed. They settled him in the darkness, on a dry blanket, the air cool and tasting of dust and old pollen. "Stay here," Alonza pleaded, her eyes wide with terror. "Do not make a sound. Please, Luke, do not make a sound." They left him with a skin of foul water from the well. He lay in the dark, listening. He was their shame, their secret, a murderer hidden among their sacred pollen and prayer sticks. The fever returned, and he drifted. The sound of Taya's knife sharpening below, the sound of Alonza weeping, the sound of Naichi's silence. It all blurred into a single, agonizing vigil. 3 days passed, 3 days of starvation, fever, and waiting. The mud in the canyon dried and cracked under the relentless sun. The women worked, trying to salvage what little they could, their movements watched by the empty sky. On the 4th morning, Taya's warning came, a sharp, bird-like whistle from her post on the rim. Horses. Luke, lying in the cave, heard the sound. Not the 2 or 4 riders of Silas's crew. This was the steady, heavy tread of a full posse. 10, maybe 12 men. They rode into the ruined canyon, their horses picking their way through the debris. Luke crawled to the mouth of the cave, his heart a cold stone. He could see them. The deputy marshal was there, his badge glinting. Silas's men were there, their faces mean. And at the front, on a big black horse, was a man Luke had never seen. But he knew who he was. He was older, dressed in a clean black coat, his face a mask of cold, righteous fury. It was Hazlitt, the father of the boy he had killed. "We know you are in there," the deputy's voice boomed, echoing off the rock. "Luke Berenger, come out with your hands in the air. We have you surrounded." The canyon was silent. "He is here," Hazlitt roared, his voice cracking. "I can smell him, and I can smell them." He looked at the hut, at the signs of their ruined life. "Filthy savage women, harboring a murderer, you are an offense to God." "Sir," the deputy said, his voice calmer, "let us handle this." "Handle it?" Hazlitt sneered. "They are animals, all of them. Burn it all. Burn the hut, smoke them out like the rats they are." Mr. Hazlitt, that is not—
Do it!
Hazlitt commanded. One of Silas's men, eager, swung down with a torch. He lit the dry thatch of the ruined hut. The fire caught instantly, flame licking the adobe walls, black smoke beginning to pour into the bright blue sky.
No.
The voice was Naichi's. She emerged from the rocks near the cave path, where she had been hidden. Taya and Alonza were behind her, huddled in the shadows, but Naichi walked out, alone, into the center of the canyon. She was holding the old, long-barreled rifle. "Leave this place," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that made the men pause. She stood between them and the path to the caves. The deputy held up his hand. "Ma'am, we are agents of the law. We are here for Luke Berenger. He is a wanted murderer. Give him to us, and you will not be harmed." "He is not here," Naiche said, the lie flat and clean. "You have burned our corn. You have burned our home. Now go." "Old woman," Hazlitt said, dismounting. He walked toward her, his black coat flapping. "You are harboring a killer. You are as guilty as he is." "This is our land," Naiche said. She raised the rifle, aiming it at his chest. Luke's heart stopped. He knew the rifle was not loaded. They had no powder, no shot. It was a bluff. Hazlitt saw her, a lone Apache woman aiming a relic at 12 armed men. He did not see bravery. He saw insult. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You—" He strode forward. He did not even draw his gun. He swung the heavy butt of his own rifle in a short, brutal arc. The sound of the wood hitting her head was a dull, sickening crack. Naichi fell. She did not cry out. She just collapsed, a pile of worn calico in the dust. The rifle clattered beside her. "Naiche!" Alonza screamed. It was a sound of such agony that it tore through the air. She and Taya rushed from the rocks, grabbing Naiche by the arms. "Got the old one," one of the men chuckled. Alonza and Taya, weeping, terrified, dragged Naiche's limp body back into the cover of the boulders. Scrambling toward the path, Hazlitt turned, dusting off his hands, and looked up. "Now," he bellowed.
"Where's the coward?"
"Leave them alone!" The voice was Luke's. He stood at the mouth of the cave, high on the path. He was swaying, his left arm bound tight to his chest. His face was pale, streaked with sweat and dirt. In his good right hand, he held Taya's beaded charm. No, the knife. He had Taya's skinning knife. The posse turned, surprised.
"There!"
the deputy yelled.
"There he is! Berenger!"
"Get him!" Hazlitt roared. "I want him alive. I want to see him hang." Silas, his lip curled in a sneer, swung down from his horse. "He is mine, Mr. Hazlitt." He and 2 other men started up the narrow, rocky path, their revolvers drawn. Luke looked down. The hut was burning, casting a flickering, hellish light. Alonza and Taya were huddled over Naichi's still body in the rocks below him. He looked at the men climbing. They were coming for him, but they would have to go past the women. He was done running. "Come on, then," he roared, his voice raw. He was weak, but this was his ground. He knew every rock, every foothold. Silas came first, his boots scrambling. Nowhere left to run, savage lover. Silas spat. Luke did not wait. He met him. He threw himself down the path. Using his weight and the element of surprise, he slammed his good shoulder into Silas's chest. The man grunted, firing his pistol wild. The shot echoed, screaming off the canyon wall. They both fell, grappling, rolling on the narrow path. Luke's wound screamed, a white-hot agony. Silas was strong, his hands finding Luke's throat. "I will kill you," Silas choked out. Luke's vision was spotting. The firelight from the burning hut and the setting sun mixed, bathing the world in red. He was being strangled. He could not breathe. With his last surge of strength, his right hand, still gripping Taya's knife, came up. He drove it, hard, into Silas's side, just under the ribs. He felt the resistance, then the horrible, sickening slide of the blade. Silas's eyes went wide. His grip on Luke's throat loosened. A deep, wet gasp escaped him. "You—" Luke shoved him. Silas rolled, limp, off the path and crashed onto the rocks 10 feet below. He lay still, his eyes open to the sky. The other 2 men stopped, horrified. "He killed him! He killed Silas!" From the rocks, a shot cracked. Taya had the rifle. She had found a bullet. The shot chipped the rock near the men, sending fragments stinging. "Get away!" she screamed, her voice pure fury.
"He is armed,"
one of the men yelled, scrambling back down.
"He has a knife."
"He is a savage," the other one shouted, following him. They reached the bottom, their panic spreading. "Silas is dead! He stabbed him!" Hazlitt's face was purple with rage.
"Shoot him! Shoot him down!"
The men raised their rifles, but Luke was already gone, back in the shadow of the cave. He was bleeding, heavily, from his shoulder and a new cut on his head, but he was alive. The deputy marshal raised his hand.
"Hold your fire! He is trapped! He is wounded!"
"I want him!" Hazlitt screamed. "And you will get him," the deputy said, his voice hard. "But my men are not getting slaughtered on that path in the dark. This ain't an arrest anymore. It is a war. We will pull back. We will wait. He is bleeding. He has no food, no water. He will come down, or we will go up in the morning." "You are letting him go?" "I am letting him die," the deputy said. He looked at the burning hut, the dead man, the women hidden in the rocks. "This place is finished." He gave the order. "We retrieve the body. We ride back to the settlement. We will be back at dawn, with reinforcements." The posse gathered Silas's body, mounted their horses, and rode out of the canyon. They left the smoke, the ruin, and the dead. The silence that fell was worse than the gunfire. It was the sound of complete desolation. Luke slid down the path. His legs giving out, he crawled to the rocks where the women were. Taya was kneeling, the rifle across her lap, watching the canyon mouth. Alonza was holding Naichi in her lap. She was rocking her, her face a mask of numb, silent grief. "Naichi," Luke whispered, touching her arm. Naichi's eyes flickered open. She was conscious, but barely. The side of her head was crushed. She was dying. "Luke," she breathed, her voice a dry rattle. She saw the blood covering him. "You fought—" "I am sorry." He choked, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "Naichi, I am so sorry. I brought this—" Her eyes focused on him, a last spark of the iron will that had defined her. "No," she whispered. "The world was already here. You just showed it." She coughed, a wet, terrible sound. "You—" "Naichi, do not talk," Alonza wept. "Save your strength." "Strength is gone." Naichi looked at Luke. She looked at him for a long, clear moment. "You were never ours." She rasped the old words. "Pinda lik o yi." "But—" Her gaze flickered to the empty pass where the posse had left. "You were never theirs, either." Her hand, which had been clutching her chest, opened. She let out a long, final sigh, and the iron was gone. She was still. Alonza wailed, a low, animal sound of pure loss, burying her face in Naichi's hair. Taya let the rifle fall and covered her face, her shoulders shaking in a silent, violent grief. Luke stared. The leader was gone. The rock was gone. The canyon was a grave. He was shattered. As the dawn broke, painting the smoke and ruins in a cold, gray light, they buried her. There was no clean ground. Luke, his good arm aching, his shoulder on fire, used the rifle butt to help Taya scrape a shallow grave in the rocky soil near the cliff wall. There was a place there, marked with stones, where she had told him their husbands lay. They put her there. They wrapped her in the one blanket that had been in the cave. Luke lifted her. She was so light, he placed her in the earth. Alonza knelt and placed a small, beaded charm, one of her own, on Naichi's chest. They covered her with stones, their hands raw, their hearts empty. When it was done, the three of them, no, the two of them, and him, stood in the wreckage of their lives. Taya was the first to speak, her voice hollow. They will come back. Hazlitt. He will come. They will not stop. We cannot stay, Alonza said. She looked at the fresh grave. There is nothing to stay for. She turned her gaze south, toward the endless, brutal expanse of the desert.
Mexico, we must go, now!
She looked at Luke. He was the target. He was the murderer. Luke, she said, her voice shaking, but firm. Come with us, south, across the border. They cannot follow us there. We can live. Luke looked at the grave. He looked at the ashes of the hut. He looked at his hands, covered in his own blood and the dried, dark blood of Silas. His guilt was a physical thing, heavier than the mountains. I cannot, he whispered. Look at what I did, Naichi, Silas, the boy in Tucson. I am a plague. I have to stay. I have to face them, to atone. Atone? Alonza stepped toward him, her eyes, puffy from weeping, suddenly blazing with a fierce, desperate light. They will hang you. Is that atonement? Is that what Naichi died for? She died to protect us, to protect you. Do not let it be for nothing. Do not let them win.
I am poison, Alonza,
he said, his voice breaking.
Everywhere I go, I bring ruin.
Then bring it south, she said, her voice fierce. She grabbed his good hand. Her own hand was trembling, but her grip was like steel. I lost my husband. I lost my home. I lost Naichi. I will not lose you. She was not begging. She was commanding. We are the last, she said, her voice softening. We are the ghosts Naichi spoke of. Come with us. Be a ghost with us. Please, Luke. We cannot survive alone, and neither can you. He looked at her hand, small and trembling, yet so strong. Holding his... He looked at Taya, who was watching them, her face hard, but she gave a single, sharp nod. Go. He had brought them ruin, but they were all he had left. They were his. Naichi was wrong. He was theirs. All right, he said, his voice hoarse. We go. There was nothing to gather. The fire had taken it all. The horses, Taya said suddenly. The men who came up the path, their horses, they scattered, up canyon. She was right. The two horses, spooked by the gunfire, had run deeper into the canyon, not out. It took them an hour. Taya tracking, Luke stumbling, to find them. Their reins tangled in a mess of mesquite. They were good horses, still saddled, with full canteens and a rifle in one scabbard. They gathered what was left of their world. The two horses, the one rifle, Taya's knife, the water, and a small bag of sacred pollen Alonza had grabbed from the cave. Luke was so weak from blood loss he could barely stand. He could not mount. Taya helped him, and he slumped into the saddle. Alonza mounted behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, holding him upright. Taya took the other horse. They rode to the canyon mouth. They did not look back. There was nothing to look back at. They turned their faces south, toward the high, indifferent desert, toward a border they could only pray they would reach. They rode into the blazing sun, two widows and a murderer, leaving their dead behind them. They rode south. They rode as ghosts, leaving a graveyard behind them. Luke was a dead weight in the saddle, his consciousness a flickering, low-burning wick. Alonza rode behind him, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, her face pressed against his back. Her warmth was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. Her tears had dried, leaving trails of salt on his bloody, sweat-soaked shirt. Taya rode the second horse, the captured bay. She held the rifle, her face a mask of such rigid fury that it looked like it might shatter. She did not weep. Her grief had been burned clean, leaving only a cold, hard purpose to move. She was the scout, the hunter, the point of their small, broken spear. The high canyon was gone, swallowed by a shimmering heat haze by noon. Now there was only the desert. It was not the red rock world they had known. This was lower, flatter, a sprawling expanse of cracked earth, skeletal mesquite, and shimmering, false water. The sun was not a light. It was a hammer, beating down on them, driving them into the dust. Luke's wound was a living thing, a coal of fire buried in his shoulder. The fever rode with him, bringing nightmares that blurred with the waking heat. He saw Naichi's face, her eyes calm as she fell. He saw Hazlitt's righteous hatred. He saw the boy from Tucson, his mouth open in a silent question. "I promise." Luke mumbled into the horse's mane. "I promise." "Shh," Alonza whispered against his back. "Just hold on. Just ride." They rode for 2 days. The canteens were almost empty. The horses, already worn from the posse, began to fail. On the third morning, Alonza's horse, the one that had carried them both, stumbled. It got to its feet, shivered, and then lay down on its side with a long, final sigh. Alonza slid off, pulling Luke with her. He collapsed, his legs useless. "It is done," Taya said, dismounting from the bay. Her own horse was slick with sweat, its head hanging. "This one is not far behind." "No," Alonza said, her voice small. "We keep going." "We walk," Taya said. It was not a suggestion. She pulled the rifle from the scabbard, checked the canteens, 1 sip left in each. She looked at Luke, who was trying to push himself up from the gravel. "He cannot walk." "I can," Luke lied, his voice a dry croak. He got to his knees. "We walk," Taya repeated. She looked at the dying horse, then at the other. She pulled her knife. "We need the water, and the meat." They did not ride again. They walked, Luke leaning heavily on Alonza, his good arm thrown over her shoulder. Taya walked beside them, the rifle in one hand, strips of horse meat, hastily smoked over a tiny, smokeless fire, in a pack. The second horse was left for the buzzards. They walked into a world of sand. The earth turned soft, pulling at their boots, each step an agony. They were 3 small, dark figures in an endless, pale ocean. On the 4th day of walking, Taya scouted ahead, looking for a dry wash, for any sign of water. She moved with her old, angry energy, pushing herself, as if she could force the desert to yield through sheer spite. Luke and Alonza, moving at a crawl, stopped to rest in the thin, useless shade of a palo verde. "She blames me," Luke whispered, his tongue thick. "She blames the world," Alonza replied, wiping his face with a dry cloth. "And she is right." They heard the sound. It was not a shout. It was a sharp, indrawn gasp, cut short. "Taya," Alonza whispered. They found her 20 yards away, by a nest of boulders. She was on her knees, her face gray, staring at her own leg. 2 small, dark punctures, weeping a thin, oily fluid, marked her calf just above her boot. "No," Alonza breathed. "Oh, no." "Sidewinder," Taya spat, the word a curse. I did not see it. Stupid." Her anger was there, but it was thin, undermined by a new, cold terror. Alonza fell to her knees, fumbling with Taya's knife, the one Luke had used on Silas. Luke, his mind cleared by the sudden adrenaline, grabbed Taya's leg. "The stocking! Tear it! A bandage! Tight! Above the knee!" Alonza tore a strip from her own dress, binding it high on Taya's thigh. Luke took the knife. He did not hesitate. He made 2 quick, shallow cuts. Crossing the fang marks, he lowered his head, his own mouth cracked and bleeding, and sucked. He spat a mouthful of dark, venomous blood onto the sand. He did it again, and again.
Stop,
Taya gasped, her hand on his head.
You will poison yourself.
He ignored her, sucking and spitting, until only fresh, red blood flowed. Alonza watched, her face a mask of terror. It was too late. The venom was already in her. They had no whiskey, no medicine. They had only the sun and the sand. By noon, she was burning with fever. By afternoon, her leg was swollen, the skin turning a dark, bruised purple. By evening, she could not stand. She was delirious, muttering about her husband, Kani, about the songs he sang, about the creek.
We have to move,
Alonza said, her voice breaking.
We have to carry her.
Luke looked at Taya, light as a bird, trembling on the sand. He looked at his own useless arm, at Alonza, who was skeletal from lack of food. We cannot, Alonza wept. We cannot.
Get her up,
Luke said. His voice was rough, but it was the voice of a man who had made a decision. Luke, your shoulder.
Get her up.
He knelt, his back to Taya. Put her on, he commanded. Alonza, sobbing, helped lift Taya. She was a feverish, light weight. Luke wrapped Taya's arms over his shoulders. Gripping her wrists with his good hand, he stood up. The pain from his own wound was so intense it was almost white, but he locked his knees. He was standing.
Alonza,
he said, his voice straining. You take the rifle. You take the canteens. You walk in front of me. I will follow. I cannot. You will, he said. Walk. He began to move. One step, then another. He was carrying Taya. He was carrying the anger, the grief, the fire of their small, lost family. He walked, his boots sinking into the sand. Alonza walked before him, her shoulders slumped, her hand clutching the rifle. He walked for miles. The sun set, and he walked in the moonlight. Taya moaned on his back, her breath hot on his neck. He walked until his legs were shaking, until his good shoulder felt as if it were being torn from its socket. He fell. He fell to his knees, Taya rolling off him onto the sand. He could not get up. It is enough, Alonza whispered. Luke, it is enough. We rest. He crawled to Taya, who was breathing in shallow, harsh gasps. He was a failure. He had failed Naichi. He was failing Taya. Then the wind began to blow. At first, it was a sigh, a cool breath in the darkness. Then it was a moan. Within minutes, it was a rising shriek. The sand began to move, stinging their faces. The sky, which had been clear and full of stars, was blotted out. A storm, Alonza cried, her voice torn away by the wind. We will be buried. Luke looked up. The world was a howling, yellow-black chaos. He could not see 10 feet. He grabbed Alonza's hand. He reached for Taya. Through the screaming sand, he saw a shape, darker than the dark. A wall, a structure.
There,
he roared over the wind.
There!
He half-dragged, half-carried Taya's body, his arm linked with Alonza's. They stumbled toward the shape, fighting the wind, which tried to tear them apart. They fell through a black opening, a hole in an adobe wall, and tumbled onto a floor of hard-packed earth and shifting sand. They were inside. The wind howled outside, a deafening, solid wall of sound. But inside, it was only an echo. They were in a large, dark space. The air was dry. Sand poured through cracks in the roof, but they were sheltered. Alonza fumbled, striking a flint against the steel of Taya's knife. A small spark caught on the dry fibers of her dress she had torn. The tiny flame illuminated their refuge. They were in a church, an old, abandoned Spanish mission. The roof was half gone, open to the sky in places, but the main nave was intact. The pews were rotted, eaten by termites. At the far end, an altar of crumbling adobe still stood, and above it, a large wooden cross hung crookedly on the wall. They were safe from the storm, but not from death. They laid Taya near the altar. The sandstorm raged, a howling choir of ghosts. It was night, but it was as loud as a battlefield. Alonza knelt, holding Taya's hand. Taya was unconscious, her breathing a faint, wet rattle. She was dying. The venom had won. Luke sat, his back against a crumbling pillar. His body was a single, throbbing ache. His shoulder, his legs, his hands, raw from digging Naichi's grave. He watched Alonza, her profile lit by the tiny, flickering flame, as she whispered to Taya in their own language, trying to guide her on a journey he could not understand. He was the cause, his arrival, his gunfight, his escape, his blood trail. He had led the world to their door. He had led them into this desert. Naichi was dead. Taya was dying. He had killed them as surely as he had killed Silas, as surely as he had killed the boy in Tucson. The guilt was a physical thing, a stone in his gut, heavier than the man he had carried. He looked up at the crooked cross. He was not a praying man. The God of his youth was a distant, stern figure, a God of judgment and wrath. He had seen too much wrath. But he was broken. The silence Naichi had spoken of, the one that broke a man, it was here. It was inside him. God, he whispered. The word was dust in his mouth. I do not know what to ask. He squeezed his eyes shut. The wind howled. I am done. I have killed. I have run. I have failed. Naichi, she was better than me, and Taya, she just wanted to be safe. He was not praying for himself. He was not praying for Taya to live. He knew it was too late. He was just reporting. He was confessing to the wind, to the dark, to the broken cross. Please, he choked, a dry sob tearing at his throat. Let it be me, not them. I was the one. It should be me. He opened his eyes. Nothing, only the wind, and Alonza's quiet. Steady weeping. He had prayed, for the first time since he was a boy, and the only answer was the storm. The storm raged all night. Sometime before dawn, the wind began to die, and in the sudden, terrible quiet, Taya's eyes opened. She was lucid. The fever was gone. She looked, her gaze clear and cold, at Alonza. Alonza, she whispered. Her voice was thin as thread. I am here, Alonza sobbed, gripping her hand. I am here. It is cold, Taya said. She looked past Alonza, her eyes finding Luke in the shadows. He crawled closer. Her face, which had always been a mask of anger, was smooth. The anger was gone. There was only weariness and fear. I am afraid, she whispered. Connie, I cannot hear his songs. He is waiting for you, Alonza said, her voice breaking. He is waiting. Naichi is waiting. Do not be afraid. We are with you. Taya's gaze held Luke's. He saw no blame, no hatred. He only saw a deep, terrible loneliness. The same loneliness he carried. He reached out with his good hand and laid it over hers and Alonza's. Taya looked at their hands, all three together. A faint, small smile touched her lips. We were... Her eyes closed. Her head turned to the side. A small, soft sigh escaped her. She was gone. The silence that fell was absolute. The storm was over. The world was utterly still. Alonza laid her head on Taya's chest and wept, her body shaking with a grief so profound it had no sound. And in that silence, Luke broke. Naichi's death had been a shock, a horror. This was a slow, quiet surrender. It was the end. The last of the fire, the last of the anger, the last of the canyon. A dry, racking sob tore itself from his chest. He cried. He bowed his head, his body trembling, and wept for the boy in Tucson, for his horse, for Naichi, for Silas, and for the angry, brave woman who lay dead on the floor of a ruined church. He wept until there was nothing left inside him but a vast, hollow emptiness. When the sun rose, the world was scoured clean. The sand was piled in great, smooth drifts. The air was cool and new. They took her outside. They found a lone mesquite tree, its branches twisted, that had survived the storm. Luke dug the grave. He used Taya's knife and his bare, raw hands. His shoulder was numb. His heart was numb. They wrapped her in her own blanket. They laid her in the shallow grave. Alonza knelt and placed the small bag of sacred pollen in her hand. "For your journey," she whispered. They covered her with rocks. It was a small, sad mound. Alonza stood, her hand resting on the rocks. She looked at the grave, then at the empty desert around them. She looked at Luke. "We are the last of them," she said softly. "It is just us now." They walked for 3 more days. They were ghosts, 2 broken people moving through a dead world. They did not talk. There was nothing to say. They shared the last of the horse meat, the last of the water. On the 4th day, Luke saw a line of green in the distance, a river. They stumbled to its banks, a shallow, muddy ribbon of water. They drank. They fell asleep in the shade of a cottonwood tree. When they woke, they saw it. Across the river, a village. Small adobe huts, the smell of wood smoke, the sound of a dog barking. They crossed the river. The water was cool, washing the grime from their legs. They walked into the small village. People stopped to stare. 2 figures, barely human, draped in rags. One with a blood-soaked, makeshift sling. The other a woman with eyes as old as the mountains. They were not a threat. They were just done. An older woman, her face a web of kind lines, came out of a hut. She looked at them, said something in Spanish, and then simply gestured to a water barrel. She brought them a bowl of beans and a stack of warm tortillas. They ate. It was the first real food in weeks. They ate in silence, and when they were done, the woman pointed to a small, empty hut at the edge of the village. "Casa," she said. "Home." They were taken in. The village asked no questions. The border was a place of transience, of people running from something. They were just 2 more. Life, slowly, began to return. Luke's shoulder healed. It left a puckered, ugly scar. Another mark on his skin, another story of failure. But the arm worked. He found work with a local ranchero, a man named Mendoza. Luke knew cattle. He knew horses. He was quiet, and he worked hard. He was paid in coin and in food. Alonza, her hands restless, found her rhythm. She borrowed a small loom from the woman who had fed them. She began to weave. She traded her small rugs in the village for flour, for thread, for candles. Her patterns were not the sharp, bold designs of her people. They were simpler, lines of brown and gray and sand, the colors of the desert that had almost claimed them. Their love, which had been born in a desperate, moonlight kiss, changed. It was no longer forbidden, no longer hunted. It was quiet. It was steady. It was the fragile, tough thing that had survived. It was in the way he came home at night, smelling of horse and sweat, and found a bowl of stew waiting. It was in the way she would be weaving by firelight, and he would come and stand behind her, his hands gently rubbing the ache from her shoulders. They rarely spoke of the canyon. They never spoke of Naichi or Taya. The grief was a foundation they had built this new, small life upon. One evening, months later, they sat outside their hut. The sun was setting, painting the high, flat plains of Mexico in strokes of orange and deep, bruised purple. The air was soft. It was a kinder desert than the one they had fled. From the center of the village, they heard the sound of children laughing, a high, clear sound. a sound of a life they had never known. Luke watched the dust, golden in the last light. He looked at Alanza. Her hair was tied back, and the lines of grief on her face had softened. She was no longer the haunted, terrified woman from the canyon. She was just still. "We could still make a life," he whispered. The words were small, afraid. Alanza was quiet for a long time, watching the colors fade. She did not look at him. "Only if you promise," she said, her voice soft, but with a core of Nietzsche's iron. "Not to ride away when it hurts." He looked at her, and he understood. He had spent his life running. From his past, from the law, from love. He had wanted to stay in the canyon, to atone by dying. She was asking him to atone by living. He reached out and took her hand. It was rough from the loom, calloused and strong. He held it. He did not say anything. He just held it. They sat together, two souls scarred by the past, finally still, watching the desert turn to gold. The wind moved through the mesquite trees, a soft, endless sound, like a prayer that had, at last, been carried home. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment with where you are listening from to connect with others. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.